In 1967, James Bedford was the first ever human to be cryonically preserved. Since then, researchers around the world have been improving on the core technology. It's a process that happens in nature, too. Certain types of frogs freeze themselves over the winter and thaw when the spring rolls around. But it still kind of sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Not to my guest today, who's working to make it an affordable, reliable, and realistic option for everyone. Dr. Emil Kendziorra is founder and CEO of Tomorrow Biostasis, a company which stores your body in liquid nitrogen at nearly negative 200 degrees Celsius until humanity may be able to revive you and fix whatever caused your death. If you're new to the Utopian podcast, welcome. Please consider following the UPod on whichever platform you're using and sharing it with your friends. It really helps me reach a wider audience. Don't forget to check out my website at theutopian.blog for more. So I think it's useful to first run through the actual process of how Tomorrow Biostasis operates so that we have a mental picture as a sort of foundation for the rest of our conversation. So you decide to sign up, then what's next?
Right. So once you then have actually signed up, and signed up is a three-stage process, so to speak. So one is just becoming a member with us, right? So it means email address, telephone number, and payment information. So that's step one. After that, you automatically are sent a cryopreservation contract. So this is the contract that makes the fact that where you tell us that you would like to be cryopreserved should something ever happen to you, right? So this is the legal basis. The legal basis here is a body donation contract for medical research. And then last but not least, and now this is very individual. So somehow this cryopreservation contract needs to now be funded. As we might discuss down the line, cryopreservation is still a relatively expensive topic. So there needs to be some kind of funding in place. A good amount of people use some type of insurance, either a whole life insurance contract or a term life insurance contract or any other funding mechanism. So the third step would always be putting that funding into place. And we're collaborating with a couple of insurance companies. If you want to put your funding in place with that insurance, then you can do that. And once all of these steps are done, then you're fully signed up and your cryopreservation contract is funded. And then, well, hopefully you're not going to need to use that anytime soon. But should anything happen, then in short words, we're going to send one of our teams, one of our cryopreservation teams to you. The team will do everything on site, and then you would be transported to one of the long-term storage or long-term care facilities, where then, well, the body would be kept in cryopreservation until, hopefully at some point in the future, this whole process is reversible, so that it can then be revived in the future. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So luckily, at least for the topic of cryopreservation, in most cases, people die with some amount of advance notice, right? So it's just statistically speaking, if you're not 22 and ride a motorcycle, then in most cases you die at a relatively advanced age due to cancer, due to heart disease, due to diseases where you have a good amount of advance notice. So in those cases, the person who wants to be cryopreserved contacts us. Right? But of course, you can imagine cases where there's a last minute death, let's say car crash or a heart attack or whatever it might be. So in those cases, we rely on a set of methods that we are being notified as soon as possible. Some of them are just documents, right? So basically, we would recommend all of our patients to have, or all of our members to have medical patient advance directives, so that then if the doctor sees one of those, they would know that they should contact a cryopreservation organization. Of course, our members have membership cards. We give them cards to give to their next of kin so that they can contact us, and so on and so on. And we're currently in the last stages of development of a mobile app based system that can also interface with which has time-based triggers, kind of deadman switches, right? So if you don't say, hey, I'm still alive every, let's say, 24 hours, then the system sends out an automated emergency system. It can also work with pulse measurement devices, any type of smartwatch, be it an Apple Watch or whatever it is, that then, if there's no pulse data, sends out an emergency signal to us, and so on. So there's a range of different things that can hopefully one of those ensures that in a large majority of cases we're contacted without any delay.
Okay, and then when you bring the body with an ambulance to the long-term storage facility, what happens then?
Yeah, so the process already starts while on the way, right? As we said, we want to start cooling as quick as possible, and the reason here is always the more you cool, the less cells die on a cellular level. You as a whole, of course, you're legally dead, you're clinically dead, but on a biological level, on a cellular level, the cells still have the capability of sustaining life if you cool down quick. So you would already start doing that with ice, with chest compressions, with different types of medication and so on. So there's a range of things that you do. Now, when you arrive at the cryopreservation facility, now in some cases, much of the work is already done at that stage. In other cases, you would do most of the work then on site. Definitely what always needs to be done, once you start cooling down, initially you start cooling down from the outside. And now the cooling rate, if you just put ice on someone, is just not that fast. So what you want to do, you want to use also internal cooling. Internal cooling would mean you perfuse a cryoprotective agent at low concentrations initially, so that this cooled liquid circulates through the body, very similar to a heart lung machine that is being used in operation rooms, to cool down the body quicker. And then the second, of course, the second advantage what this cryoprotective agent helps you with is if you cool down further than 0 degrees, at that point you want to have already a cryoprotective solution concentration that is high enough to not have any ice crystals form. So you want to cool down quick. You want to do everything that no cellular degradation happens. You want to provide this cryoprotective agent before you go down under 0 degrees where ice crystals might form. And then you want to cool down further and further in the end to around minus 196 degrees Celsius. And then at that point, you would be in long-term care and long-term storage at one of the facilities.
Great, and we'll go into more detail on just all of those sort of steps later on. But first, how many people right now are signed up, and how many are currently in cryopreservation, and what kind of demographic of people are these?
Right. So worldwide, a couple of thousand people are signed up. Right. So this is by any means, this is very much an innovative, cutting edge and so on topic. So you're definitely in the first adopter group, leading the cutting edge if you sign up for cryopreservation. So I checked once that there are more super yachts in the world than people signed up for cryopreservation. Right. So it's definitely it's not a super large topic yet. A couple of thousand, somewhere in the 4,000 to 5,000 people range worldwide are signed up for cryopreservation with a very strong focus on the US. And then about 10%, so 400 to 500 people are in cryopreservation so far. People who are not members, because our average member age is, if we come to the demographics, is 35 or 36 right now. Meaning, of course, statistically speaking, luckily those people don't have that many medical problems and don't die regularly. So that's the age demographic. Otherwise, from a demographic, it's more male than female. About 70-30, about 75-25 in that ballpark. And then it's usually, and the last demographic factor that is easy to see is most members have some amount of tech background. Doesn't mean they're computer scientists, but some relationship to tech, right? Working at a tech startup, being an investor, being a computer scientist, working in product management, project management, whatever it is, some amount of tech background. Or scientists. It's relatively broad, but that is the last defining characteristics, except for gender distribution and age distribution. Everything else is kind of all over the place.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you mentioned that they're mostly tech, because I'm thinking maybe their thinking is like, well, if I wake up in 200 years, like I'll be able to see what tech will have, and it'll be awesome,
Yeah, that might be a factor. I think the other factor is usually people in tech who work with tech, who work in tech, they have usually a more positive outlook on that tech is as a force for good, right? What tech can do. They might be able to more easily imagine that, technological progress is very fast, exponential in some cases, so that these things will be possible. So all of that is probably parts of why the demographics are how they are.
And it's actually also interesting that it's very young. Like you mentioned 35 or 36 is like the average age. I was wondering if you have any thoughts, like what do you think motivated these people who are so young to sign up for this?
Yeah. So I think the age is a bit skewed, meaning that we mostly do online marketing, right? Which probably skews the age group a bit towards the younger side of things. But I think one of the reasons might be that people who are around 60 to 70 right now, even though of course religion goes, like less and less people are being or would call themselves religious in Europe, people who are now 70 or 80 or 60, they probably grew up with a significantly more religious background. So one tendency, I think, and they might not even call themselves religious anymore, but I think probably it's still somewhere back of in their head, maybe even half subconsciously. They might have some of these thoughts, and of course, in this case, the most important one being, what happens to me after I die, right? Whereas younger people who are now maybe in their 30s or 20s or 40s, they might have grown up with significantly less of this religious background.
And now to pivot a little bit, one of the most common concerns that people have about cryopreservation is cost. And of course, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like the whole process will set you back like 100,000 or 200,000 euros, right?
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah.
And what is Tomorrow doing about that? Quick interlude before we hear Emil's answer. To clarify Tomorrow's pricing structure, it's composed of two parts. One is the sort of upfront donation of 100,000 roughly euros, and that's mostly what we talk about. But the other is a monthly fee, which there's three types or three packages: Essentials, Premium, and Platinum, ranging from 40 euros a month to 100 euros a month, where the main difference is Platinum covers people for all ages, and Platinum is also the option you want to go with if you're doing a lot of international travel, and the team has to get your body, for example, on a remote island or something. They use a private jet rather than just an ambulance. Most of the money goes towards maintaining this team and keeping them on standby 24/7, but also part of the money goes to R&D of the biostasis process, and part of it also goes to a hardship fund that helps individuals pay for cryopreservation who can't.
Yeah, so it's the cost of cryopreservation is one of my biggest pet peeves with it, and the reason, of course, being for that, and I come from medicine and as a doctor as background, so I don't think that if you want to be cryopreserved or not, it should not be decided based on how much money you have, if that is possible or not. And unfortunately, at least if you want top of the line quality right now in regards to your cryopreservation quality, it is like not everybody unfortunately is able to afford it. This is not necessarily something unique for cryopreservation. This is the case for anything that's a niche topic, something that is just about or just coming up, right? So this is not unique in this case, but it's still a downside. So there's a couple of things. So first of all, 200,000 euros sounds more like, so some people, of course, you don't need to pay this out of pocket, right? So not all of these 35-year-olds that are now our average members, only a minute minority has actually paid the money. Most people do it via life insurance, and most young people have at least part of their financing plan with term life insurance. So if you're relatively healthy, and let's say 30-ish or 35, then your term life insurance is I don't know, 30 euros a month or something like that. If you have, I don't know, if you have any medical conditions or pre-existing conditions, then it might be a bit higher, but it's relatively affordable. Of course, and now coming back to the people who do sign up, right? Tech background, computer scientists, product managers, whatever. Most of those people, at least statistically speaking, will have 200,000 euros at the end of their life, right? It might not be in liquid assets, but it might be in their house or whatever it might be, right? Nevertheless, this still makes the point that some people are not able to afford it. It's still an argument, and I think it's an important argument. So the only thing that we can currently do for that is two things. One, we're very actively working on bringing the cost down. One of the biggest factors for this high cost is currently the very small amount of people who actually are signed up and want to be cryopreserved. A lot of the cost of cryopreservation goes down with scale, like a lot. So it's very possible once Europe, once you grow 10x or 100x in Europe, that you can offer high quality cryopreservations in the 20,000-30,000 euro range. So 10x cheaper than it is right now, potentially even cheaper than that. But at that point, it becomes difficult to predict.
Yeah. I'm also just wondering, do you or would you turn down a body after determining that there's just no chance of saving it? Like after, a car accident or something like that. And more importantly, how would you come to that decision? Like if a body is worth preserving or not, especially in those sort of gray cases.
Yeah, so that's medically speaking, that's an almost impossible question to answer. And the reason for that, of course, is that since we don't fully understand how the brain works, where consciousness comes from, and so on, it's very difficult to put a cutoff somewhere. So of course I can imagine, okay, I can describe what is a very good case, and I can describe what's a very bad case, right? And now, but somewhere in those middle points, there is a case where it's impossible to put a clear threshold, right? And now, due to the fact that it is impossible to put a clear threshold, our answer to that question is that we are going to cryopreserve regardless of what is the prior situation or how the person died or what is the quality of cryopreservation. And not because I can't tell you that, if someone, dies in a plane crash and there was a big fire and whatever, that is going to be a very, very unlikely thing. This is easy to answer. It's also easy to answer what's a very good case, but it's almost impossible to answer where like in what you call a gray area case. Is it gray area leading towards, okay, we don't cryopreserve that, or is it gray area leading towards we do cryopreserve that? So there is no answer that I can give that has any scientific or medical or whatever backing. So, and due to that being the case, we decided that we are in all cases are going to cryopreserve the patient.
Okay, but what if there's like literally like no head or something? Like, do you still cryopreserve?
Yeah, so if there's no, let's say, worst case scenario, right, whatever, the head, I mean, it's a bit graphic, but the head is not being found. In that case, we don't.
Okay, and in that case, would you actually refund the down payment or give it to the relatives of the deceased?
Yeah, it's technically not a down payment, it's technically a donation, but the person in that case can decide if no cryopreservation is being performed. And of course, let's take an extreme case, right? Plane crash over the Atlantic, right? Plane is never being found, right? Of course, that's statistically very, very unlikely to die due to a plane crash over the Atlantic, but it's possible. In that case, the person who signed up can decide what should be done with the money that, for example, in this case, the insurance maybe would pay out. What should be done with that money? And it can be donated to research, it can be given back to the family, and so on, whatever they would like to do.
And now pivoting towards the science a little bit more, I understand that by replacing the blood with cryopreservation fluid and so on, you reduce the potential tissue damage from the low temperatures. But isn't thermal stress on the body's cells, and in particular the brain, like still a problem on an extended time scale? And like, could it be an issue for people who are cryopreserved right now? Yes,
all of the above. So yes, it could be a problem, and it is one. So first of all, so once you're cryopreserved, right? Once you're fully cooled down, and at temperature of minus 196 degrees has been reached, at that point nothing happens anymore. So there's no further degradation at that point. There's no thermal stress. The thermal stress is being already released during the cool down process, right? At that point, no further degradation happens. Nothing happens. So at that point, you can maintain that cryopreservation state, practically speaking, indefinitely. But of course, getting there, there is damage. There is these cryoprotective agents. They have a certain degree of toxicity, and so on and so on. There's thermal stress, and there's a multitude of things. And of course, everything we do is reduce these amounts of stress and damage and so on as much as possible. But it is absolutely clear that people who are being cryopreserved with current technology, there would need to be some amount of repair in the future, right? There would be some amount of technology that is currently doesn't exist, that would be required to get people back to a state where revival would be possible.
Okay, and now to focus on the long term a little bit more. I'm just wondering how it's even possible to maintain an operation like this over what could be centuries. And with that, could you explain the roles of the Tomorrow Patient Foundation, the European Biostasis Foundation, and kind of how this whole process is built to last?
Right. So absolutely. So this is one of the very important questions for cryopreservation, right? Okay, doing this day-to-day work and all of that, of course, that's one part of the of what needs to be done. But then the second part, of course, is once someone is in cryopreservation, making sure that they stay safe and sound in cryopreservation. And not only that, but there's also someone there that then has an incentive and the capabilities and the financial means to, once technologically possible, to revive them. Now, Tomorrow Biostasis is not the organization which maintains the long-term storage, and the reason for that is that you can build organizations that are made to be very good in a day-to-day, in day-to-day work, but this usually doesn't mix well with organizations which are built for very, very long-term stability. So usually for long-term stability, at least historically speaking, what worked well are foundations, non-profit foundations. So the long-term storage in our case is always with a non-profit foundation, one of which, for example, is in Switzerland, but can theoretically also be one of the ones that are in the US. And if in the future more of them exist, then potentially also wherever else a stable non-profit foundation exists. Now, you can do a couple of things to make sure that this non-profit foundation stays mission aligned. For example, you go to a country where they have relatively strict non-profit foundations regulation, Switzerland being one of those, where you can't change the purpose of the foundation once it has been set up. You need to make sure that the board of that foundation is only run by people or only staffed by people who are really intrinsically motivated for the topic, right, and don't have any financial or other incentives to be there, and so on and so on. And so the foundation that we set up has all of that. There needs to be, the only reason what you can do, you need to make sure that incentives are aligned and that there's a certain amount of flexibility to, for example, counteract geopolitical changes and whatever it might be, right? So in worst case, we just move the patients to another country. But I think it's not possible to say, hey, we are very confident that our foundation, that it is perfectly set up to survive 1,000 years.
And those initial 1 to 200,000 upfront costs, how are those used?
Yeah, this part of financial stability is very important. So there have been organizations in the past, and it's still active today, that do the kind of like a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, right? Where you say, hey, new patients new people who sign up pay for the people who are in cryopreservation. This is a horrible idea. So and the reason for that, of course, being you need to make it absolutely sure that this organization does not rely on any additional influx of capital to maintain operation. So what you do, and we and all the other trustworthy organizations out there do this as well, there's a relatively large chunk of those 200,000 euros being put aside. In our case, around 120,000 euros. Now, that is being managed by the nonprofit foundation. And what the foundation now does is it invests that money at very low interest, so very, very secure, around 1 to 2% above inflation. Once inflation is back to around 2%, that means around a return of 3 to 4% per year. Historically, that has always been possible to get those levels of returns with very low risk. I think T-bills over the last 50 years or so, I think were 1.9% above inflation. So now that money, the return is being used to pay for the maintenance. For the annual cost to maintain cryopreservation, only the return is being used. So that the principal amount, the 120,000 euros, stays inflation adjusted the same over the years, so that A, you can always maintain cryopreservation without any practically for an indefinite amount of time, and then B, that for any type of whatever the technology will be in the future to do revival, which of course currently is not known, you have around 120,000 euros in 2022 euros available for the revival procedure, whatever it might be.
And yeah, and it's almost like starter money then, like in the new society.
Yeah, so that unfortunately it's possible that there will be some money over, but it's also possible that revival will cost the equivalent of 120,000 2022 euros, so that all the money or a large amount, a large part of the money needs to be used for revival. And of course, technically, if we're talking very long-term future, it's possible that this will be a post-scarcity society, that there's not necessarily the need for too much personal wealth to participate in society in a very meaningful and fulfilling way. So of course, all of these topics, this is just somewhere between prediction and speculation. So all of that is nothing that we can guarantee, but these things will need to be figured out then a bit further down the line.
Yeah, and definitely this connects well to the next point that I want to talk about, which is focusing more on the revival, which is undoubtedly probably the most interesting and science fiction-y part of this whole story, but also one with the most uncertainty. Are there any kind of conditions specified that give the people of the future the green light to wake you up, or is it just like, let's revive them as soon as possible, or is there no protocol regarding that?
Yeah, no, there are a couple of things. So of course, the most important one being it actually works, right? Again, like it's very important to state that currently it's not possible, right? You can cryopreserve people, but you can't take them out of cryopreservation, and it might take decades to centuries until this is possible. And I don't think it's decades. I think it's closer to the centuries. Or at least 1 century. And at that point, I feel like every prediction kind of breaks apart and becomes kind of belief or speculation. The second part being, of course, the people that died, they died due to some reason, right? Let's again coming back to the example of cancer or heart disease. So of course, it would always be then necessary to, for example, let's stay with the cancer example, to cure the cancer that killed the person in the first place. And then last but not least, let's say this person died at the age of 85, then of course it only makes sense to revive someone once the future medical technology has advanced so much that at the age of 85, you have a significant relevant amount of years of life left, right? It doesn't make sense to revive someone at 85, or their age being 85. You cure the cancer that they had, but then just statistically speaking, the average life expectancy is another 2 years, right? And then they die at 87 due to, let's say that's heart disease or whatever, right? So these are the three base, high-level base assumptions that you need to, or base requirements that need to be fulfilled until you would bring people back.
So many other questions pop into my head about the whole revival process.
My main prediction or main speculation in that regard is, if you look into the past, right, and look at how society has developed, then it doesn't feel like it, but we live in the best time ever, right? So least amount of child mortality, least amount of people living under the poverty line, and so on and so on. So my prediction would be that while there probably will be hiccups, I think there's a better case to be made, a higher probability that we will end up in a more utopian society, utopian future, as opposed to a dystopian one. So I think the likelihood that someone wakes up in a better society is higher than in a dystopian society. So there can be edge cases, of course, where this is not the case, or there can be cases where this is not the case. I think in most cases, for people who like to live longer, I think this fear that they wake up in a dystopian society where they then regret their choice, I think this is pretty low.
I'm just thinking, even in like you know, a benevolent, a utopian society, like what if you couldn't understand the society, or you couldn't find a place to live, or like legally, how are those that come from the distant past treated? Especially like if future humans are augmented or altered, like how can they integrate? How are they educated? Brought up to speed on like 200 years of history.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's possible. Of course, so in on one case, you can argue that a future society with the amount of technologically advancement, augmentation, and so on, would have the capabilities to then bring someone who came from, let's say, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, up to speed. The other argument would be that you can imagine that for whatever reason, again, we don't fully understand how consciousness works and so on. So it's possible to imagine that there can be a cutoff point where, for whatever reason, you can't bring people up to speed anymore. And in that case, I would argue that the most likely case would be that the future society probably, once they have revived us, probably still have an interest, feel like there's a moral obligation towards us, right? Just like, we probably would feel a moral obligation towards someone who lived like 300 years ago or even 1,000 years ago, right? So it is possible that at that point, yes, we would maybe not be able to participate fully in society, but arguably the future society, again, maybe a post-scarcity society, would still make sure that we're living a fulfilled life.
Anyway, it is probably a good idea to go moving back to the present. Do you see Tomorrow or other organizations offering cryopreservation for people who are still living anytime soon?
No, not anytime soon. And so first of all, you have a lot of moral questions there, right? The other thing, you have a lot of legal questions. So this would, for example, currently not be possible at all. Right, cryopreservation is not an accepted medical procedure. It's research. So that would legally not be possible, and morally, I don't think I'm not sure if it should be possible.
Continuing on the same line of thinking, I've noticed like a lot of research and a lot of talk lately in the whole tech world about other anti-aging treatments like gene therapies and so on, that can potentially extend your lifespan to whatever 120, 140 years, which you can do while you're still alive. And a lot of people are optimistic that this will be actually commercially available within a few decades. So my question is, do you think that this kind of life extension could potentially undermine the value proposition of Tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, so they have the better value proposition, right? So just taking, a pill or treatment or whatever is the better value proposition. It's even the better value proposition for me, and I very much hope that they are right. So I hope that I never need to be cryopreserved, right? So in fact, I actually come from that space, right? So I studied medicine, did cancer research, and all of that to go into the field of longevity research and life extension research. The only reason why I switched over in quotation marks to cryopreservation is the prediction of how long it will take until this pill or treatment or combination of treatment and pills or whatever it is will be available, right? You said the field kind of says, hey, they're optimistic in a couple of decades. So I'm taking any bet if someone says, hey, there will be a significant and relevant extension of maximum lifespan, right? We're not talking health span, we're talking maximum lifespan. As you said, to 120, to 140 or whatever. I'm taking any bet. So if someone wants to bet, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to bet. Because I see very few data points that make me optimistic that there's a good chance that will be around anytime soon.
So I asked my people on Instagram for quick fire questions, which is @the.utopian.blog if you want to check it out. And the top one was, are you being cryopreserved, Emil?
Absolutely. Hopefully I will not be, but if need be, I will be.
Okay. So there's your answer, folks. So one question, we're coming up towards the end. One thing that you're pretty clear about in your other media appearances is that Tomorrow centers around one thing, which is to give people a choice of having a second life. And I really like that you actually in no way try to convince people that biostasis is the right choice. You just inform people and let them decide independently. But then my question is, why? Like, are you sure that this choice is actually good for people, for the sake of equality, for the environment, for the future of our species? Like, should we really be meddling with these things?
So I think so. So to be precise, right? So I'm not saying, hey, we give you we give you the choice to definitely live longer or live again, right? We give you the choice to take the chance to potentially live longer, right? So we can't even claim, and at least in my mind, we can't even claim that this will definitely work, right? So regarding these questions of meddling, right? So I would always argue that humanity, for all its existence, has always meddled with everything, right? I mean, we live way, way longer right now due to meddling with, biology or whatever than we did in the past, right? So I feel like this argument, if someone says, should we meddle with that? That the argument, if you boil it down, I think always comes down to someone basically claiming, hey, this is not normal. We shouldn't do this. But then my counter argument would always be, if you think one step further, everything we do right now was not normal at some point, right? In the 1700s, it was not normal to take a plane to the US or cure, certain types of cancer or diseases or not die due to infection, right? Until we had antibiotics and so on and so on. So I think that cryopreservation is fundamentally not something different than any other medical advance or technological advance that society and humanity has made over the last, since always. The second question is, so let's say that's still the case, and we could still argue there are probably some technologies that we should not develop further. For cryopreservation, I think the core argument here is that I think it is the moral and ethical correct thing to, yes, do offer it. Otherwise, of course, I wouldn't do it. And the reason for that is, if someone chooses to be cryopreserved, right, they're using their own capital. They're using their own money. They're not taking away anything from someone else. So I'm not advocating that it should be paid by a statutory healthcare system or by a tax-funded system or whatever, right? I'm arguing that people should be able to make their choice for their own money to do that. And now, since you brought up climate change or other reasons, I think you can. It's totally fine if people have value systems where they feel like another value that they would like to optimize for is on a higher priority than cryopreservation. And depending on your value system, I very much agree with that. But as long as we, in quotation marks, be okay with people taking vacations in expensive regions of the world, right? Or drive large, expensive cars and live in nice, expensive and whatever houses, I don't think that cryopreservation is anything different there. So since I'm very much for a liberal society, I feel like cryopreservation, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people deciding for cryopreservation, as long as they make this decision without hurting anybody else. They make the informed decision that they really want to do that. And there's no coercion to actually be cryopreserved.
And sadly, that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope that it got some people considering cryopreservation as a feasible alternative to burial or cremation, which I'm going to be honest, most people haven't. And what's the best way of learning more about Tomorrow, about your work, or getting in contact with you, Emil?
Yeah, so first of all, more than happy to, we have a webpage called tomorrowbiostasis.com. So there's a lot of information about the topic and so on there. I have a Medium blog at Emil Kendziorra, first name, last name together. So there's a couple of things. And then if anybody is interested to discuss in person, on our webpage, there's a large set of schedule consultation buttons and so on. So if anybody wants to reach out to us and talk in person, always more than happy to do so.
Thank you, Emil, for joining me and for being so transparent and educating us about this rarely discussed topic. I wish you success with Tomorrow Biostasis and your future work in general.
Thanks a lot. Great being here. And yeah, happy to talk to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the UPod. If you did, please give a like if you're on YouTube, and follow the UPod on whichever platform you prefer. That's Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. If you want to learn more, go to www.theutopian.blog and join my newsletter. I also share exclusive interview highlights, infographics, and community events which you can join all on my Instagram at the.utopian.blog and on my LinkedIn page, The Utopian. I'm always open to being messaged on any of those platforms if you ever want to get in touch. I really appreciate your support, and I hope to see you next time.